Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second day of the annual conference of the Skopje Economic and Finance Forum, under the auspices of the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of North Macedonia. It is with utmost pleasure that we invite to the stage our honorary guest, the President of the Republic of North Macedonia, Mr. Stevo Pendarovski, to give his presidential address.
Poštovani prisutni,
Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to address the Skopje Economic Finance Forum organized by the Ministry of Finance. A few days ago, I participated in the forum in Davos. The focus was how to sustain growth in uncertain times and how to plan future growth. Today's topic contains two similar aspects. The first is focused on the urgency and imposes the question what type of short-term measures we should undertake to keep macroeconomic stability and to mediate the shocks caused by the geopolitical turbulences. The second aspect is focused on the middle-term and long-term projections and plans to sustain growth. Whereas the key issue is whether we will have a period of normalization and stability, or we will have to learn how to function in constant uncertainty due to the crisis. If we take in consideration the last 20 years, we would notice that the ecological, social, and security issues faced by humanity have increased in number and intensity and complexity and effect from the terroristic attacks in 2001 through the global crisis in 2008, the Arab Spring in 2011, the refugee and migrant crisis from 2015, 2016, and the COVID pandemic. We haven't had a longer period without serious crisis. At the same time, global megatrends such as the digitalization, climate change, and the growing inequality have drastically changed the functioning of the industry and the labor market. The pandemic compressed these megatrends and shortened the time that we thought we had to implement the policies connected to the sustainable growth objectives. We have slowed down growth, inflation, greater public debt, and deepening the inequality between states and within the states. The Russian invasion on Ukraine interrupted vital supply chains, caused the energy crisis and interruption of the food chain. Due to the fast changes, many reports, many strategies are obsolete even before they are published. And if we are viewing the future through the prism of our experience, it is best to build a model of economic growth that will be resilient to crisis. The founder of the Economic and Finance Forum, Mr. Schwab, presented that the crisis presents the weaknesses of the systems and where we should find the solutions there for future development. In this context, in the period of interruption of normalcy, the resilience depends on two things: our adaptability and decisiveness. The old paradigm often addressed issues to growth, inclusivity as separate spheres. As a result, we had compromised policies focused only on growth instead of equality and justice. Or according to the new paradigm, these three dimensions are interdependent, and we should force them at the same time. Growth should be sustainable towards the environment and also inclusive, reducing the social inequality. Of course, today, primary focus is on economic growth of North Macedonia and the region, and our response in this context should comply with the Macedonian specifics. In this context, at the very beginning of my mandate, within the framework 2025, as a long-term vision for the future of the country, The objective of the strategy was to have a comprehensive idea for better life for the citizens. The strategic document officially will be promoted next month. On this occasion, I would like to briefly share with you the 4 developmental priorities of the strategy. The first priority is accelerating the economic growth of at least 5% yearly. The imperative is to increase productivity and competitiveness of the national economy by structural transformation of the economy and modern technological solution as the main drivers of the production and service activities. We should reduce the grey economy and to provide flexible and dynamic labor market. The second priority is protection of the environment and redefining Macedonian energy policy in order to respond better to the internal and external demands and external shocks. Thirdly, comprehensive digitalization that will open investments and new jobs. According to the latest report of the World Bank for the global perspectives, one of the more important steps for reducing inequality is digital innovation. That is why until the end of this decade, we should complete digital economy and to invest more in the development of the Macedonian IT sector. The fourth priority is education and inclusive development. In order to prevent brain drain, we need systemic measures to create comprehensive digitalized education according to the modern trends and labor market. We must invest in every phase of education to strengthen the relationship between educational institutions and companies in order to increase functional literacy among graduates and students. According to the holistic paradigm of growth, these 4 priorities will have to be implemented at the same time. In this great effort, the contribution should be by all segments of society, from the state institutions, political factors, the private and civil sector, and the academia. Dear guests, if we want sustainable development, the first priority is to rethink the model of economic development. And of course, if our ambition is not only to survive, but also to thrive. Maybe short term, some of the policies will be hurtful, but on a long term, they are very useful. I believe that if we fulfill these priorities, not only we will overcome this turbulent period without losses, we will manage to create conditions for sustainable growth in conditions of uncertainty and beyond. That is our obligation, not only to the companies, but also to the current and future generations. Thank you.
We're privileged of the President of the Parliament of North Macedonia, Mr. Talat Jaferi, who will complement the presidential address. Mr. Jaferi, please welcome to the stage.
Dear distinguished President, Mr. Pendarovski, distinguished Minister of Finance, Besimi, distinguished President of European Bank of Development, Mrs. Benson, respected Investment Bank, Mrs. Pavlova, dear media representatives, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me, on behalf of the Parliament members of the Parliament of North Macedonia and my personal name, to greet the all the participants of this forum organized by the Ministry of Finance, and to express my gratitude for the excellent contribution of all the guests. I am convinced that this will be a contribution more in the global sector, but above all in the domestic sector, financial sector, for a better management of actual challenges and future challenges for our economy. Dear guests, I won't say anything new if I say that from the previous conference until now, the world and we as a country, we continue to cope with the consequences of COVID-19. The negative effects was the biggest under the vulnerable group, but no one remained untouched. As country, we follow the fiscal policies for overcoming the gap among the social groups of the people and financial support of the vulnerable groups. But this cannot continue endlessly. We are a small country with limited resources, and we have to be accountable for the balance and economic growth. I believe that our activity in the foreign policy and the cooperation in the region and Euro-Atlantic perspective with the regional initiative is a good ground for support from our international friends. I am convinced that it need to be energetic security and enough food for all the citizens, and the banks for bigger rates need to be consolidated, and to support the domestic economy should be overcome only with the support from the domestic institutions and banks. This is a good, encouraging signal for us as institutions and our citizens. The opening of the branch of the European Bank is an excellent news. As responsible for economic growth of the country and for economic benefit of the citizens, we need to provide our maximum contribution for overcoming the challenges from the last global challenge, aggression on Ukraine from Russia, which made a huge impact in the global market. Instability in energy supply, so-called issues and problems with the food chain globally. We didn't expect this, we didn't want this, but the reality is as it is. Unfortunately, there is no forecast for a quick resolving of this problem. So it will, the situation will will continue to remain insecure, and this has impact for business in the European Union market, and for the labor market, and for poverty as well. I'm not a financial expert, but economic diplomacy is a field where we as politicians can do much more for a better Euro-Atlantic perspective. We need to make better policies for investments, and in the time of digitalization, I'm happy with the fact that our potential is at the same page with the Western democracies. I'm happy that the awareness for accountability is raised about the environment and public health. The orientation of the sustainable policies in the renewable resources, which we have luck to have them enough, is a must. For me, it's very important the inclusion of the youth for the policies, environmental policies. All is very important. All the components needs to be included for authentic implementation of these policies. And regional infrastructural connection is a vital vital interest for our country, and the regional cooperation and international cooperation is the best way for energetic success. This will encourage the trade, but energetic security as well in these times of and we need to follow the new trends, and we need to go the same path with new technologies and innovations. Respected, during all this time, we must not forget the main precondition for a strong and independent institution, which aim will be to fight against crime, organized crime and corruption, a functional judicial system which is guarantee for protecting the human rights and for an environment, for a proper development and the security of its masters. We need to invest for the human capital quality, and we will do this with the investments by upgrading and with better education. all these aspects are extremely important. If we forget one of them, it will be a boomerang for us. It was proved in the past when we felt their importance. I sincerely believe that we learned the lesson. Dear guests, I wish you a fruitful conference and thank you for your attention.
Distinguished guests, we're honored to open today's agenda by introducing the third thematic pillar, energy, green transition, and infrastructure, with a keynote speech from the President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Please welcome Ms. Odile Renaud-Bassot.
Excellencies, dear President of the country, dear President of the Parliament, dear Minister, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's really a great pleasure for me to participate for the first time to this Skopje Economic and Finance Forum and to intervene on this very topical and crucial issue of energy, green transition and infrastructure. I will quote to start the Dalai Lama, who is credited with the phrase, "Whenever there is a challenge, there is also an opportunity to face it, to demonstrate and develop our will and determination." And when we think about the most pressing challenges of today, it is hard to think of a bigger opportunity and a more suitable solution than investments in energy and in green infrastructure. It's clear that climate change already poses a huge challenge. We all know that this will change dramatically our way of doing things, our way of thinking. We also know that we need to do what we need to do in order to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. We need massive electrification to achieve economic-wide decarbonization. And we need to decarbonize the electricity by promoting large-scale renewables and exiting fossil fuels. And we need also to progress towards more energy efficiency. European countries have set very ambitious objectives for CO2 emissions towards carbon neutrality by 2050. This will impact all aspects of our lives, and it will require massive investments and coordinated policy actions. However, the climate change challenge is today made even more daunting by the effects of the current energy crisis and the war on Ukraine. Even prior to this, the scale and nature of the climate crisis looked daunting. But what the current global situation has underscored is the importance of guaranteeing energy security in a sustainable and economic viable way. It has highlighted the central role of diversification of the energy supply. And this provides an opportunity to accelerate renewable investments, while at the same time emphasizing the need to improve national electricity networks and cross-border connections, along with more open energy market. In this challenging context, the countries in the Western Balkans should remain fully focused on their low-carbon trajectory and commitments. They should do so in line with the strategic document of the respective countries, stimulating at the same time public and private investment in new renewable capacity to meet and exceed the country's renewables target. This is because, in the current conditions, the cost advantage of renewables versus traditional forms of electricity generation is multiplied and is absolutely obvious. The more renewables we build, the cheaper and more domestically produced electricity we will be able to provide to the businesses and households. This will make businesses more competitive and successful, and cheaper electricity will make citizens better off and help them prosper. And this will make the region cleaner and the environment better. In this context, I would really like to praise the Macedonian authorities. I commend them for the determination in implementing the low-carbon pathway in the form of the green scenario of the Macedonian strategy for energy development until 2030. Despite the current international context, we will stand firm on the position that emissions must halve by the end of this decade. And by 2050, or shortly after, fossil fuels must be either phased out or fully decarbonized in order to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. We need to act together to achieve these goals. The reform plan of the energy and gas sector associated with the EBRD liquidity loan to ESM, which is under discussion, is proof of our ambition in this area. So are the efforts of the authorities to increase private and public investments in the renewables energy sector. This challenge requires a physical transformation of the infrastructure, especially the grid networks that underpins all modern economic activities. And it also needs a systematic transformation of the market and regulatory structures that govern it. The transport sector is another large emitting sector of greenhouse gas emissions. In the EU 27 and OECD countries, CO2 emissions from transport represents around 20% of the total emissions over the last decade. And road transport accounts for 3/4 of transport emissions generally. So while the EBRD continues to support connectivity and pan-European road corridors, rail transport, which is at least 50 or 60% cleaner than road transport, is a key priority for us. Railways offer an environmentally friendly, sustainable, innovative, safe, and efficient means of transport. And I'm really proud that EBRD has financed more than 1 billion euros of projects in the rail sector in the Western Balkans as a whole. So now is really the time to seize the opportunity, the support available, and invest in sustainable infrastructure to bring the region closer together in a way that also addresses the climate crisis. EBRD, with its partners, institutions, EU and EIB, are providing well-structured finance and support and for the implementation of investments in line with best international standards and practices. And this will benefit the country's economies as much as its people, who will reap the rewards of closer integration and cooperation. So this is much more than only economics, but also global cooperation. To build green infrastructure in the Western Balkans, we really focus on 3 priorities. First, investment. By selecting the most relevant and the greener opportunities, the EBRD commits to invest in a greener future for the region. Here, I would like especially to mention our Green City program and our successful partnership with the city of Skopje. Second priority, opening up markets and facilitating regional integration, working with the governments of the region and the private sector, which can provide an important contribution to the modernization and expansion of infrastructure. And third priority is to focus on improving quality of services. For instance, commercial speed for both passengers and freight movement is at the key for the model shift to happen away from trucking and car travel. All successful rail systems in Europe show that. This will require further strengthening of capacities to prepare and implement projects and improved governance. We are pleased that as part of our joint efforts to promote greener infrastructure systems in the Western Balkans, we have deepened our cooperation in the regions with governments, investors, institutions, and bilateral donors. This illustrates the commitment of all parties to turn the huge challenges we face into an historic opportunity. If we commit to the goals of the Paris Agreement, we create the opportunity to unleash massive innovation and investment, create high-quality jobs, open new markets, diversify economies, and build greener, more livable communities that prioritize sustainable growth. We look forward to continuing working together with the governments in the region, and in particular in this country, and the private sector, on the successful completion on ongoing projects and launching new ones. Thank you very much for your attention.
Warm welcome to the second keynote speaker for the thematic pillar, the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, Ms. Liliana Pavlova, presenting her view on the topic.
Dobro utro, good morning, distinguished excellencies, dear President Pendarovsky, dear President Jaferi, dear Minister Bassimi, dear Minister Nassar Nouradini, dear colleagues, excellencies, Ambassador Geer, dear friends. It's really great pleasure and honor for me and my colleagues to be here for a second year. Thank you, Minister Bassimi, for not only organizing this forum, but really based on your efforts, this forum became an important platform to discuss strategic issues, a platform where we can sit together and come up, hopefully, with ideas, solutions, how to overcome the different challenges and so many uncertainties we are all facing at this very right moment. Dear President Renaud Bassot, thank you very much for indeed what you said. And I also strongly believe, and I would like to convey the message, that only if we team up, like the excellent opportunity of Team Europe, uniting our efforts between the financial institutions, European Commission, other donors, with governments, with local authorities, with private sector and society, only then we can achieve the results we need, and only then we can really address the challenges, because each challenge is indeed an opportunity to rethink how we can work, how we can address, and how we can modernize or innovate the way we are facing the different challenges. Because at the moment we have one crisis coming on the top of the other. We were already on the path of sustainable, I should say, recovery from the COVID pandemic, and then now, as a result of the devastating war in Ukraine, we are all facing the negative impacts of and consequences of that war, and we have to address different challenges: economic, social, food production, and most importantly, unfortunately, the serious energy crisis which we are all facing. But at the same time, we should not forget climate change, because this is the right moment also to address the climate change. The clock is ticking, and we should not miss the opportunity to address and to use the crisis as an opportunity to accelerate on green transition, on transformation, on diversification of our economies, of the energy sector, transport sector, and all sectors of the economy which were impacted. Because the global energy distribution is already taking a very heavy toll on industry, on companies, and on households. And this urges us to adopt, as we say, a two-tier approach. On one side, to ensure the diversification and to ensure stable energy supply for different means and initiatives, and at the same time, to be even more rigorous in achieving, in performing all actions needed to achieve our extremely ambitious goal of 2050 Europe becoming the first net zero emission continent globally. In order to do this, of course, we need to create new and more innovative energy strategies, additional and new infrastructure, technologies focusing on innovation. The new economic environment and resulting from the Russian invasion in Ukraine, of course, unfortunately, will lead to reduction of the EU economic growth and beyond, pushing the inflation to new heights this year. So that is why we need really to find the best way and to plan strategically in a very sustainable manner, despite the uncertainties, the right steps in the direction to follow. Regarding the impact on competitiveness, the EU companies are showing vulnerability due to lower exports, higher energy prices, and funding stress due to rise of risk aversion. Chemicals and pharma, food and agriculture, transportation, raw materials are the sectors hit the most, as their energy dependence is extremely high. In industry, energy costs are one of the major drivers of the competitiveness. So improving how we use the energy is really crucial for Europe's economy to remain competitive, innovative, and to ensure sustainable growth. Analysis show that 60% of total energy savings could be achieved in less energy-intensive sectors. Given the fact that the vast majority of the European SMEs European companies are small and medium enterprises, we need to focus and to concentrate our efforts specifically on SMEs as a backbone of the European economy, of the Balkans economy, of course, as well as of the North Macedonian economy. Because the most affected countries are those where the consumption basket is more sensitive to energy and food prices, and this is what we see, unfortunately, in the Southern Eastern Europe and the Balkans, and that is why special attention is extremely important and needed here in this region. Amid the war in Ukraine and other global challenges, we must, of course, as I said in the beginning, not lose sight of the need to address the climate change through adaptation and mitigation. And therefore, we, as the EU Climate Bank, have already adopted the necessary framework in order to support our partners on their pathway to align with Paris Agreement and to boost more systematically the climate change adaptation globally and locally. On the back of the volatile energy prices and increased concerns about climate change, the awareness in energy efficiency has increased. Energy savings are the quickest and cheapest way to address current energy crisis and to reduce bills. That is why, as the European Commission proposed the EU Safe Energy Communication to enhance the long-term energy efficiency measures, including the increase to 13% on the binding energy efficiency target, we believe that we can play a role in supporting and promoting even more energy efficiency investments in the economy. Energy audits and energy obligation schemes have created a solid base with large opportunity for cost efficiency and energy savings. And I believe that based on our current adaptation and of our policies, our frameworks, we can even further increase our financing. For the last 2 years, we provided more than 10 billion euro in energy efficiency measures and investments, and we are ready to do even more. As the EU Climate Bank, we have a very clear roadmap and a plan how to achieve it, and our plan is to mobilize 1 trillion euro of investments in climate change, environment sustainability, in order to support and to support the regions and the countries of need. What we need new technologies, we need new infrastructure, and we need to make sure that our societies, our business environment is more efficient, more greener, and more inclusive. Innovation is one of the priorities, indeed, to unleash the full potential of the sustainable growth. And the Western Balkans region is part of our just transition strategy, which we have put together in order to make sure and to ensure, like also President Pendarovski said, we need to make sure that this transition is just and fair, and we have to address the issues and the problems which the most vulnerable parts of the society will be facing. Our support to sustainable development is stretching across different sectors, in the Western Balkans. In the energy sector, we are already financing the diversification and security of energy supplies in order to reduce dependency of one dominant supplier. At the same time, we are providing our special in-house expertise and technical and advisory support for preparation of more renewable energy projects, which are much needed in the region and where we are still lagging behind, but I'm sure the Minister of Environment will later speak about this. Transport sector will also have to undertake massive transformation in order to be able to adapt to EU climate goals, but also to address the current challenges. We are updating our transport lending policy of the bank in order to address the challenges, to contribute more and to ensure that our financing will lead to more safer, more cleaner and more resilient transport systems. And I'm glad to say that we have been already preparing and supporting the Western Balkan partners, also here specifically in North Macedonia, to prepare strong and robust pipeline of projects, both in the direction of identifying and preparing good projects, as well as investing in something which is key for the region, key for the country indeed, and this is the right capacity to implement, because this is one of the main challenges we still see here in the region. We have many projects which I will not mention for the sake of time, but I can say that together with the government, together with the local authorities and our partners, we do have a strong pipeline of projects, like rail corridor 8, water and wastewater treatment facilities, and many other projects, like also investments, but as well as technical assistance. And last but not least, of course, with a strong push and support by the Ministry of Finance, now we are looking forward in creating more innovative financing to be provided in support of the private sector, supporting SMEs, with a dedicated investment lines through the Development Bank of North Macedonia in order to incentivize at better prices greener investments, and also to support the government program to address the challenges of the current situation. And before concluding, I would like to use once again the opportunity to thank the government, to thank specifically Ambassador Geer, the EU delegation, because yesterday we, as something we have promised recently, we have opened our office in Skopje, in North Macedonia, in the premises of the EU delegation. We have already here our head of office, our representative, Mr. Bjorn Gabriel, who is here among us. We are also increasing our team in our regional office in Belgrade, so more colleagues, more teams will be here, available on the ground, and this is indeed our strategy. Our strategy is to increase our local presence, to be more present on the ground. This is part of our new initiative. We established our new branch in the beginning of this year. The branch is called EIB Global. Through this branch, our intention is to strengthen our partnerships, to strengthen our local presence, to be able, through this more enhanced, more sector-specific support on the ground, with better coordination and collaboration with local, international partners. I'm happy to say here that as part of Team Europe and part of our bilateral cooperation, we have increased significantly and strengthened significantly our cooperation with our colleagues and partners in EBRD. And in that way, we believe that we will be able to provide on a daily basis much needed, more tailor-made support to address the specificities of the sectors and to address the challenges. So, with this, I would like to conclude by saying thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, and I hope that with joint efforts we will be able together to accelerate on the deployment and the implementation of the economic investment plan of the EU for the region, and also supporting, in addition, the massive investments which are needed in order to sustain and to support the economic growth of North Macedonia. Thank you very much.
Honored guests, it is now time to open the first panel debate of the day, Energy and Green Transition, moderated by Ms. Alexandra Nakieva-Ruzhin, Professor of Public Finance and Industrial Organization at the University American College, Skopje.
Ready? Dear Ministers, Excellencies, dear guests, good morning to all and a warm welcome to the panel on energy and green transition. The presidential addresses and the keynotes delivered this morning from one of the world's largest multilateral donors in climate action projects are a great overture into our panel today, which covers one of the most topical themes apparently today that has been greatly and generously promoted by other panelists and other speakers at the forum so far. And before introducing my distinguished guests for today, let me give you a brief introduction into the theme. Along with radically disrupting the global energy market, the ongoing war in Ukraine has further disclosed the dependence of Europe on imported fossil fuels, and particularly its reliance on Russia in energy. Given this complex geopolitical disposition, further aggravated by the war, a week ago, the Commission's President von der Leyen presented the so-called REPowerEU, which is the EU's plan to reduce its reliance on energy on Russia and further speed up its clean energy transition. The price tag for REPowerEU is about 300 billion euro, out of which about 10 billion euro will go in investments in missing links for gas and LNG, about 2 billion euro in new oil infrastructure, and the remaining financing will go into new clean energy projects. Simultaneously, the EU intends to increase its 2030 target for energy efficiency from 9 to 13%, as well as its 2030 renewable energy target from 40 to 45%. The new targets seem quite ambitious, particularly the one on renewable energy, given the current state of affairs in this domain. Namely, according to the EU Director General for Energy, about 25% of total EU's energy consumption currently comes from gas, about 32% from oil and petroleum, while only 80% currently comes from renewables and biofuels, with the solid fossil fuels making up the rest. EU's dependence on natural gas means a dependence on Russia. Currently, at the moment, the EU is the world's biggest importer of natural gas, and its largest share, about 41%, actually comes from Russia. High dependence on Russia is also present in the extra crude oil imports of about 27%, and solid fuels, or mostly coal, imports of about 47%. This sounds worrisome in terms of energy security, although at this point it seems that neither Moscow nor Brussels have an economic, political, or military interest in weaponizing Russia's natural resources. Nevertheless, a big question that remains is whether phasing out Europe's reliance on oil, natural gas, and coal will enable the continent to effectively diversify its energy mix in favor of the renewables, or it will drill, dig, and buy fossil fuels somewhere else. This is particularly pertinent as any future heavy reliance on coal, oil, and gas in practice means more locked-in emissions, which is contrary to the global pledges for decarbonizing the global economy by mid-century in order to counter the climate changes. Hence, with or without the new geopolitical reality in Europe and the world, never before has the case for keeping the oil, coal, and gas in the ground been so stronger. This means that the fate of the Earth rests in the hands of the energy and the financial sectors, and in their profound transformation of their current fossil fuel-based business models. But here again, let's do a brief reality check. A report published last week by Oil Change International, which analyzes the latest climate pledges of the biggest 8 oil and gas companies, reveals that these companies alone are involved in over 200 fossil fuels expansion projects on track for approval from 2022 until 2025, which is equivalent to the lifetime emissions of 77 new coal power plants. Moreover, the research shows an active effort from the US oil and gas industry to use the war in Ukraine to advocate for policies which encourage new or increased oil and gas production and rolling back previous climate policy decisions that limit the production of oil and gas or require climate consideration in new projects. Hence, the question remains if the companies that have so far collectively contributed to fuel the climate crisis can be trusted to confront it now and in the future effectively. Unfortunately, the situation does not look any brighter on the bank side that make climate changes and then continue supporting fossil fuels. A recent comprehensive assessment of the world's 30 biggest listed financial institution, concluded by InfluenceMap, shows a clear disconnect between the financial sector's stated climate policies and commitments and its climate-relevant financing and policy lobbying activities. Namely, the assessed financial institutions cumulatively enable at least $740 billion in primary financing to the fossil fuel production value chains in 2020 and 2021 alone, which is equivalent to 7% of their total primary financing in this period. The same, unfortunately, is true for the fund managers, who are obviously sticking to the with fossil fuels by not setting the expectations that companies in their portfolios should quit developing new coal, oil, and gas projects in line with climate science. So simply put, we know all of this is against science, but the question that remains is what do we do with it? With these last words, I'm delighted to introduce into the discussion my distinguished panelists today, the Minister of Environment and Physical Planning, Mr. Nasser Noureddini, the Director of the Energy Community Secretariat, Mr. Artur Lurkovsky, the Head of the EU Delegation in Skopje, His Excellency Ambassador David Gir, the Resident Representative of the UNDP, Mr. Armen Grigorian, the Loans and Social Development Director at CAB, Mr. Cristian Tabakaru, the Director of the KfW Development Bank in Skopje, Mr. Rene Eschemann, the CEO of EVN, Mr. Stefan Peter, and finally, the President of the Regulatory Commission of Energy, Mr. Marko Beslimovski. We'll start with Minister Noureddini, whom I will have to excuse in advance because of his already planned trip to Vienna today, so he will have, unfortunately, to leave the panel in some half an hour. So, Minister Noureddini, North Macedonia, as a contracting party to the energy community, has committed itself to the 2050 climate neutrality target. These commitments include implementation of a number of EU directives, regulations, and rules in our national legislation. So in your address, could you kindly state or number the different legislative acts and different strategies that the country has undertaken so far in this domain, and offer a brief assessment of the country's preparedness in it? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to speak here. Just for clarification, I'm not flying to Vienna for fun, although I do come from there originally, indirectly. I'm actually going to the Western Balkan ministerial meeting to discuss the transition to low emissions and the energy strategy of the region. So I'd just like to clarify that before someone thinks I'm doing something else. First of all, I think the question is, can we build a sustainable and greener future? I think the simple answer is absolutely yes. I think Mr. Krugman yesterday pointed that out quite nicely, that it takes some effort to change the way we currently are doing things, to move away from the conventional methods into a renewable, more sustainable future. In regards to the question, what have we done? We have the energy strategy. We are a contracting partner to the energy community. We, of course, are aligning ourselves to the ideology or to the idea to be carbon neutral by 2050, considering we are part of Europe, and I know we're still knocking at the door of the European Union to start the negotiations, but I'm sure in the foreseeable future we'll also be a member and we'll be aligning ourselves to that policy. What is very important to mention is our enhanced NDC, which we were one of the first countries in the region last year to hand in to the Paris Agreement. And we are one of the countries that actually is very dedicated and rather ambitious about it. And our plan and strategy is to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions by 51%. It is ambitious, we are aware of it. It's going to take a lot of investment, it's going to take a lot of reforms. However, the majority of it is going to have to be based on the collaboration with the private sector and with the mannerism of our our citizens and the way we consume. The key thing is, and how we're preparing ourselves is, you mentioned earlier of our energy production portfolio. Right now, the largest source of energy we have in our country, unfortunately, is coal. I'm sure that so the panelists will also discuss that, but we are committed to decommissioning our coal-fired power plants by 2030. Now, something we need to mention that as well is because, as was mentioned earlier by some of the keynote speakers, is we need to be working on the just transition as well. Because always when we speak about decommissioning the coal-fired power plants, we also have to be aware that there are a lot of people working in these facilities. So that's something that we're going to work together with the EU, hopefully, and the energy community to see how we actually transition away from that. And we need to, of course, find other sources. You mentioned natural gas. And yes, it is a fossil fuel. We have already been working on that for the last few years. Even before this crisis or this war started in Ukraine, we've been working on trying to find a second source of natural gas. And that has been actually through Greece. And we've been talking about the investment in Alexandroupolis for the terminal. And we're looking to, of course, find the second source. For us, it's a transitional solution. We have to all be aware and accept the fact that air pollution is one of the key issues that we face in our country. In order to be able to solve that in the most speedy and efficient way is the fact that we need to change the heating in our country. And gas is the one, natural gas is going to be the one that offers one of the fastest way to solve that. The other one, of course, is energy efficiency. Now the question is always, what's the cheapest way of energy? Consume less. That's simple. The less energy you use, the less you pay. And how do we do that? We need to invest in energy efficiency. Now, when we're talking about green transition, green jobs, now this is why we, together with the Ministry of Finance and the other colleagues in the government, we've decided to try and allocate funds through either the budget, the state budget, or through loans from the IFIs, EBRD or EIB, to try and find ways to stimulate the transition to energy efficiency in our country. Are we speaking about the insulation of the houses? Are we speaking about the photovoltaics, heat pumps, etc.? We're subsidizing a lot of this as well. And these are the key elements that we're trying to actually start and stimulate to actually be able to achieve our goals by 2030 and 2050. There's many other little aspects about it, but I will let actually my colleague, my dear panelists, also get a word before I continue on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Very elaborative answer. The second question goes to Mr. Lorkovsky, which is in line with the key objective of the energy community, being to extend the EU internal energy market rules and principles to other countries, including those in Southeast Europe. In this mission, the Secretariat is entrusted with a mandate for enforcing and monitoring the state of implementation of the treaty's acquis by the parties of the treaty. In your capacity as Director of the Secretariat of the Energy Community, could you please share your views on the state of preparedness of North Macedonia within the 10 areas of the acquis, and offer maybe some advice and guidelines on the areas that necessitate our utmost focus and attention for immediate intervention? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. And I see this invitation is simply the confirmation of the very good relation we have with the government of North Macedonia in transforming the energy sector in this country. Energy community is about two pillars, basically. The one is making the integration of the markets, energy markets, and the second pillar, which has been added last year to our portfolio, is the decarbonization agenda. And let me to answer your question, having these two pillars of the activity of the energy community in mind. For a country like North Macedonia, a small country with well-developed infrastructure, regional integration is a solution, is a part of the solution, and the energy community is supporting the government and the other stakeholders, including the Regulatory Commission, in this way, as we see that there is a lot of potential which could be tapped from being integrated with the regional partners, with the neighboring countries. This is true for both for electricity and for gas, and that is the reason why we are appealing very much to the government of North Macedonia for establishing a single TSO in the gas sector, and then to pursue the process of unbundling of this to be established TSO in line with the energy community legislation. We think that this process is extremely important because of the fact that the security of gas supply to North Macedonia is at stake, is at risk now, just because of the non-reliable policy of the dominant supplier and the events we have been observing for the last couple of weeks, especially the decision to cut off the gas supply to Bulgaria. The same applies to the electricity market, so we do support and we do recommend the establishment of the organized electricity market, and I hope we are at the very end of this process in North Macedonia, and with the company which will establish for doing that, we hope that the established market will give a proper market signal for the electricity sector. This process is to be continued with the projects which are aiming at having the market coupling with the neighboring countries, and this is the legislation which is to be adopted this year by the Ministerial Council of the Energy Community, with the aim to have the electricity regulation, network codes and guidance in place so that the market coupling with the neighboring countries could be used by the domestic stakeholders for optimizing the prices and for tapping from the potential of the regional integration. In this regard, I would like to underline the key role is playing the Regulatory Commission. And I would like to thank you, the Regulatory Commission, for the hard work in this regard. And this is a job which is to be applauded. And thank you very much, Marco, for your job and for being a leader in this process. When it comes to the decarbonization, the second pillar of the activities of the Energy Committee, we have already adopted the first part of the clean energy package, and that what is being expected from the government of North Macedonia is to adopt the legislation for the renewables and for the energy efficiency, and the deadline for doing that is the end of this year. And this is of the key importance for the country, as we see There is already in place some very successful auctions for the photovoltaics. They have been adopted. There are some measures to be taken in the energy efficiency, and we think that the proper legislative framework for pursuing this policies of the utmost importance. The same applies to the governance regulation, which is now the part of the acquis of the energy community, and we discussed yesterday with the respective ministers on the next steps in this regard, so that there could be in North Macedonia a proper framework for not only for acceptance of the National Energy and Climate Plan, the first one which has been already proposed by the government, still not adopted because the legal basis is missing for doing that. But we hope that this will be the next step to be organized soon. The other element when it comes to the governance regulation and the climate law, which is being the tool for adoption, is the introduction of the carbon pricing mechanism in North Macedonia, and this is the subject which would need to be discussed, which would require a much deeper reflection what model is to be chosen for North Macedonia. But the same situation applies for, like in the market development, the reality is not waiting. So we are now in the process of preparation and negotiation of the 2030 targets for the energy community. And we hope that the government of North Macedonia will take a very active role in these negotiations so that we can have for the energy community the targets to be adopted in July informally or politically, so that we can have the process of formalization of this decision by the end of this year, and the Ministerial Council of the Energy Community would be able by the end of this year to set up the targets for renewables, for energy efficiency, and for CO2 emission reductions. And this process is meant to establish the framework, the regulatory framework, and this process is about to give the certainty to the potential investors that the policy which has been declared by the government is anchored in the energy community legislation, and what could offer to the potential investor a lot of certainty when it comes to the future policies to be implemented domestically by the country. So once again, thank you very much for inviting me and really to continue this discussion on these all topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olorkovsky, for very concisely reflecting on the state of affairs in the national legislation under each of the different key areas. Your Excellency, the green transition, the diversification of the energy mix and boosting renewables, apart being a significant component of the REPowerEU plan, are also 3 of the 5 priorities of the European spring semester package. So, given the state of the affairs in the consumption of fossil fuels in EU, previously discussed, could you tell us more about the different projects and activities that EU plans to undertake to counter this heavy reliance on imported fossil fuels? And second, which is very important for Macedonia, for our aspect, is that whether you expect this heavy mobilization of funds to support the ambitious objectives of the REPowerEU. Do you think at least part of it we can expect to be translated into increased funding projects for North Macedonia within the priorities of sustainable transport, clean energy, and environment and climate under the Western Balkan investment framework? Please, Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Maybe first of all, let me congratulate Minister Beşimi and the organizers of this second forum, which is a very good opportunity and extremely timely to discuss some of the key challenges today. When the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, presented Europe's Green Deal, which is Europe's response to the triple challenges of climate change, the collapse of biodiversity, and environmental degradation, there was no war in Europe. And what the war has revealed, among other things, as you said, Alexandra, is our dependency upon hydrocarbons from Russia in the area of gas, where the European Union imports roughly 90% of its gas from abroad. More than 40%, as you've said, is from Russia. Similarly, we have 25% in terms of oil and some 45% in terms of coal. So the European Commission's proposal, Repower EU, which was announced very recently, is its proposal for how Europe should respond and reduce dependency on hydrocarbons, while at the same time keeping the focus on the goals that we've set in order to reduce carbon emissions and the other goals of the European Green Deal. And this proposal basically consists of three key principles. The first, diversification, looking at ways, working with international partners to diversify our sources of hydrocarbons. Secondly, saving, and Minister Noureddini very eloquently pointed to the importance of energy efficiency and the ways of changing behavior as well to try and reduce our dependency. And third, most importantly, accelerating clean energy through renewables, and this is the third goal. And it's divided into two types of measures: short-term measures and medium-term measures, which would be implemented by 2027. Some examples of the short-term measures. Well, one that's had great attention here is the idea of common purchase of gas, LNG, hydrogen via the EU energy platform, and which is also open to the Western Balkans. And I'm pleased to see that there are extensive discussions going on, including with this country, on ways in which we can work together on the energy platform. New energy partnerships, a rollout of solar and wind energy projects, together with renewable hydrogen deployment to save around some 50 billion cubic meters of gas imports, increase the production of biomethane to save some 17 billion cubic meters of gas imports, approval of first EU-wide hydrogen projects this summer, many other, including ensuring gas storage of some 80% by the 1st of November. The medium term, again, a wide range of medium-term proposals, which would be completed by 2027, again, very ambitious. New national Repower EU plans under the Modified Recovery and Resilience Fund to support investment and reforms, as you said, worth some 300 billion. Increased ambition on energy savings by raising the EU-wide target on efficiency for 2030 from 9 to 13%. Increased the European renewables target for 2030 from 40 to 45%. A significant expansion of hydrogen, and also putting in place a modern regulatory framework for hydrogen. These proposals are ambitious. They now need to be taken forward through the system, but the goal is very clear. Dual goals. First of all, reduce and eliminate dependency on Russian hydrocarbons, while at the same time continuing with the efforts on the European Green Deal to achieve our goals there. Now, you mentioned the Western Balkans. Well, I've mentioned that several of these plans already involve Western Balkan countries, but you ask about funding. Well, we already have the key instrument for funding in this area. In October 2020, Commissioner Vahey traveled here and announced the Economic and Investment Plan, which is some 9 billion euros for the region. And this investment plan, with its 10 different flagship initiatives, clearly sets out a number of ways in which we can assist in achieving these goals, in helping, particularly in the infrastructure area, towards a greener Western Balkans. And so we have a number of activities which we are already supporting. Well known, of course, is the interconnector with Greece. We're also providing technical assistance for the interconnectors for Kosovo and Serbia. We are investing in energy efficiency, regional projects together with KfW and EBRD to help households and public buildings do exactly what the Minister has said, reduce consumption. We're supporting investments in a 400 kilowatt connectivity grid with Albania, the feasibility study for the southeast region, and energy regional connectivity to Bulgaria. And the list goes on. We're also looking at Bitola, REC Bitola, and ways in which we can support conversion there. And very importantly, in a discussion with the government on support for the just transition, which, as the Minister also mentioned, is absolutely critical when you're looking at Ozleme, when you're looking at Bitola, the move away from coal. The challenge is, of course, that for the government is how to respond to this offer, to have the administrative capacity in order to deliver on these important projects. It's a competitive process between the Western Balkans. I'm very pleased to see that so far North Macedonia has done very well in identifying projects which have a certain degree of readiness so that we can work on supporting them. But what will be critical now is at the same time as we're rolling these out, is that the government works hard to strengthen the administrative capacity to ensure that we can together make the very best of this very significant support that we are providing in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for pointing out the need to bring together all our capacities together, to strengthen the capacities, to work on the implementation of the projects that have already been approved under the Western Balkan Investment Framework. We move on to Mr. Armen Grigorian. Mr. Grigorian, North Macedonia revised upwards, as Minister mentioned already, its commitment to the Paris Agreement last year, with presenting its second national climate pledge to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The enhanced NDC sets out a commitment to an unconditional net greenhouse emission reduction target of 82% by 2030 compared to the 1990 levels, which is a considerably more ambitious target than the ones undertaken by the rest of the countries in the Western Balkans. Given that this substantial increase in North Macedonia's pledges has been supported by the UNDP through the Climate Promise Initiative, could you please elaborate briefly on the arguments in support of such a boldly defined target, as well as on the differences in this regard that are present across the Western Balkan countries? Also, when it comes to turning our NDC into action, could you please share more details on the concrete plans of UNDP on supporting the implementation of the North Macedonia's NDC in the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to first join Ambassador in congratulating Minister Besimi and organizers for an excellent event. And also thank you for inviting UNDP here to share what is our approach and what is our thinking in terms of policy reaction to the changing climate, as well as what is our work that we are doing on the ground in this regard. I will try to elaborate in the first round perhaps on what is the corporate approach of UNDP, how do we see the challenge, the climate challenge, and what is believed to be the approach that we are trying to use globally, regionally, and also in North Macedonia. Climate Promise is a global UNDP initiative that was developed in response to the climate change, or perhaps to the climate crisis. We are working in more than 140 countries on Climate Promise, and in all these countries UNDP is supporting the national institutions and partners in developing the nationally determined contributions, NDCs. UNDP's wider climate portfolio in these 140 countries also addresses linkages of the climate change with other thematic areas such as health, education, peace, etc. Several initiatives were also proactively implemented in this region, such as climate change and security, for example, and the impact of climate change on the health and productivity. We have recently organized a regional event on air pollution and how climate change here in Skopje, but also in neighboring countries, makes the air quality worse, and what are the implications of this. In terms of supporting the nationally determined contributions, globally over 80% of NDCs are on energy. It speaks for itself that energy is in the core of the changing climate, and here in North Macedonia, the government has declared energy emergency before the Ukraine crisis erupted. So it is also an indication of how important it is for the country. Environmental portfolio of UNDP globally is, I think it's over $2 billion US. And here in North Macedonia, environmental portfolio in our country office has traditionally, for the last 20 years, I should say, been the biggest portfolio. So it's the biggest part of what we are keeping ourselves busy with. One of the ways that we approach, or we try to approach, the climate crisis is also to understand better the linkages of the climate situation with other thematic areas, as I briefly mentioned earlier. One of the processes that we are using in order to understand better the implications of climate change to other areas or here in North Macedonia is the National Development Strategy. It is a process that is quite broad. We have commissioned 20 baseline studies on different thematic areas and their linkages to climate change. They are being finalized now. We will be happy to share, of course, with all those interested. But NDS, National Development Strategy, is also a platform for bringing together, the thinking that is available in the country, not necessarily only on climate and energy, but on the implications that climate and energy can have on other areas. One of the UNDP's also corporate policy kind of initiatives that we would like to introduce here in North Macedonia is de-risking energy investments. There is a special methodology how you process this, and to understand better whether these energy investments are in the longer run improving the energy and climate situation in the country or not. As I mentioned, UNDP globally is one of the leading development agencies that is, with its portfolio on the climate. Currently, we have also commissioned a study on the impact of energy crisis and Ukraine crisis on the most vulnerable groups in North Macedonia. What we see now and the way we think that we can describe this situation is actually a compound crisis, because you have COVID, then you have energy crisis, then you have Ukraine crisis. And I think quite a few speakers yesterday as well, they mentioned that this compound crisis, overheating also the economy. As you know, maybe in concluding, I will say that, as you know, that we are in UNDP operating, our work is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, with SDGs. There are dedicated SDGs for climate and for environment and for energy. And this is they have our guiding principles that we use in working with in these areas. And perhaps in the second round, I can say a little bit more on how we, in practical terms, also implement this in North Macedonia. Thank you.
We're sorry that Minister Noureddine had to leave, but there are conflicting agendas going on constantly. Thank you, Mr. Grigorian. I guess we should, in a way, feel proud that North Macedonia is leading the way with highly ambitious commitments to the Paris Agreement and showing the way forward to other countries. And then I hope we'll have time to discuss about implementation as well. And now we have Mr. Tabakaru joining us online. I'm sorry that you had to wait for a while, but it's a way of announcing your address. I may just briefly say that Council of Europe Development Bank, with its exclusively social mandate, is widely recognized as one of the major instruments of the policy of solidarity in Europe. For our region, the bank is acknowledged as one of the partner financial institutions in the Western Balkan investment framework, actively engaged in promoting social cohesion and strengthening social integration in the region. Moreover, North Macedonia is one of the 22nd target countries of Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe, to which the bank is set to provide increased support in implementing socially oriented investment projects in predefined few sectorial lines of action. Given your flagship engagement in supporting most vulnerable citizens and in promoting inclusive growth, could you please share with us any new coming initiatives in North Macedonia that aim at green transition and mitigation and adaptation to climate change? Please.
Thank you so much. And first, again, thank you for inviting us to this event. I'm terribly sorry I wasn't able to make it to Skopje in due time. As you mentioned, CEB, as the social development bank in Europe, recognizes that climate-related issues interact with social inclusion in multiple ways, which leads to what we call the indivisible social climate nexus. Our approach identifies how individuals and communities are affected by climate change and determine how we could invest in transition to a climate-neutral and resilient future. In our case, in North Macedonia, it goes through investing in climate adaptation and the resilience of social infrastructure. These investments would enable strategic community services as schools and hospitals, or even the social housing, to remain operational during extreme events and reduce the risk that social infrastructure may become part of the problem by exposing the beneficiaries during heat waves, floods, or extreme cold in winter, especially in the context of high energy prices. In terms of projects, and because it was mentioned the cooperation between international organizations, and namely the Western Balkans investment framework, the CEB has been financing the construction of physical education facilities and renovation of primary and secondary schools in North Macedonia with several loans since 2007-2010, with a total contribution of more than 42 million. One of these loans finances an ongoing project and enables more than 100 schools to be improved and 64 sport halls to be constructed. In total, I think it's about 84,000 students, children, which benefit from this project. In the framework of this project, an European Union WBIF Western Balkan Investment Framework grant of 3 million was signed recently between the bank and the Ministry of Education, and will contribute together with the CEB loan to finance the renovation of some 30 physical education facilities and the purchase of equipment for other 50 facilities, again, with the aim to increase the overall quality of education in North Macedonia. It must be said that all our loans borne a positive environmental impact, which is mostly related to the use of environmentally friendly construction materials, appropriate waste management, and of course, proper maintenance. In all these investments, higher energy efficiency will be achieved through energy efficiency measures, and the standards have been well registered on each of these constructions. And also, because I mentioned in terms of social housing, the CEB has been also financing social housing units for low-income residents in North Macedonia since 10-15 years ago. Currently, we have a loan in amount of 25 million with the project ongoing. The project delivers some 1,700 social housing units throughout the country. These units provide higher energy efficiency and will decrease the burden and demand on energy in the country, first in the sector. And as I know, some 700 units are already in use by low-income residents. Now, looking forward, and somehow in an effort of diversification, I dare to say, first, the CEB could support micro, small enterprises, particularly in their transition to green economy. CEB could finance the purchase by these small enterprises of environmentally friendly and energy efficient equipment or machinery. We are in talks with Macedonian Development Bank in that sense. We hope to have a project approved before long. And in addition, in terms of adaptation measures to climate change, as we see more and more natural disasters in the regions, CEB, and knowing that this is a historically a priority sector for the bank was created in 1956 for natural catastrophes, migrants and refugees. CEB has been increasingly assisting the member states with their needs by supporting the public agencies in their investments related to the prevention of wildfires, earthquakes or floods. We have currently under implementation projects in Greece, Croatia, Italy, and Turkey in the sectors of natural disasters. We are aware of wildfires in North Macedonia last summer, and we stand ready to finance projects in your country's efforts to cope with this type of issues. This is in short, and I stand ready to continue discussions. Again, thank you for inviting us, and I hope the good cooperation between North Macedonia and the Council of Europe Development Bank will continue to develop.
Thank you, Mr. Tabakaru, for bringing the social lens to the green transition projects, especially in North Macedonia. And we continue with Mr. Eshman, the director of the KfW, which is one of the world's leading development banks, which only last year spent 33% of its 107 billion euros of funding for climate and environmental protection. So in North Macedonia, KfW is increasingly active in financing projects related to energy efficiency and renewable energies, irrigation and climate-resistant agriculture, and municipal district heating infrastructure. Projects supported by KF loans include modernization of 6 hydropower plants, construction of the first wind power plant in Bogdanci, rehabilitation of student dormitories, etc. And last year, KfW has also provided grant funds for feasibility and impact studies for green energy investments of the electricity company SCME. From the KfW's experience on these projects, Renai, could you please share your views on the main challenges the country is facing when it comes to initiating, planning, implementing and monitoring projects in this domain? And also, could you provide your assessment on the degree to which these challenges and shortcomings influence the pace with which the country transitions towards decarbonization and energy security? Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me on this very I think very important conference and exchange of ideas. And I hope that we in this panel also come a little bit in the mode of provocation so that we get some new insights. Indeed, as you said, financing of climate action is the highest priority of KfW. Well, the last 2 years we were just with 30%. In this sector, normally we are above 50, but KfW has provided huge financial support packages to cope with the pandemic in the German and global economy. In North Macedonia, we have shifted our portfolio since 2019 purely on climate action. So we are financing, on the one hand, climate adaptation in the agriculture irrigation, I think a very important sector for North Macedonia, also when it comes to export and job creation. And on the other hand is the energy sector, of course, as we have heard, biggest contributor to climate change, now biggest contributor also to inflation and the new price hikes we have seen on the international energy markets. And there we are on several sides active. Yeah? On the one hand, as you said, we finance renewable energies. On the other hand, also energy efficiency and alternative supply schemes. Regarding challenges and experiences in project implementation, that's a very challenging question. Of course, well, we cooperate exclusively with the central and municipal governments and with public utilities. Later on, we will hear perhaps also a little bit what problems the private sector is facing. From our experience, there are actually two key components to achieve a successful project implementation. The first is a very proper preparation, in which you really consider almost everything, all kinds of scenarios that can happen. At the end, reality will teach you differently, that is for sure. But that is the first step, and do this preparation very closely with your local partners, so with our public utilities on municipal level, the central energy providers, and so on. Because at the end, they are the ones that have to operate the facility we are financing as a donor. And then comes, and that is also interconnected to the preparational phase, and this goes for the entire project implementation, that is the management capacity. Management capacity at the implementation agency, so at our partner, is key. That the utility provides the right people they already have in their company to drive, mainly to drive the implementation process and to handle big construction contracts and also international engineering contracts. So management capacity is key. How do we cope with this? We have some projects which are quite unique for the institution. For example, for Ministry of Education, we are renovating all 9 student dormitories in the country, energy efficient, of course, but at the same time we provide full renovation. Because we do not want only to change the tires, we want to make the car run for the next 20 years. That is important. Of course, there we provide additional support capacities because that is not a daily job of the ministry. The others we expect that are already in the sector that they provide by themselves. As you have mentioned, Windpark Bogdanci. Windpark Bogdanci, I would say, was the most successful project ever, not only in North Macedonia, in the entire region. It was the first wind park in the Western Balkan 6 countries and is still one of the fastest implemented wind parks in the region with less than 18 months of construction time and implementation. And that was a very good example of good management capacity, proper planning, and then to handle big contracts in a good way. But nevertheless, I think we have to broaden our perspective when we talk about green transition and how we can cope with the energy crisis. I think we have to deepen this holistic approach and to connect the dots of the different subsectors. Yeah? So we are talking about transforming the generation part more in a green way, photovoltaic, wind power, and so on. And on the other hand, we say, yeah, and we have to do something in energy efficiency. We have to exchange something there. But actually, we have to connect both points. When we look in North Macedonia at the load curve of electricity consumption, we see that in the winter season, almost more than 50% of the electricity is used than in the remaining year. Of course, it's darker. We are using a little bit more electricity for lights. Bulbs can be exchanged. But the major point is heating. So the energy crisis actually is a heating crisis in North Macedonia. This does not only go for this country, it also goes for a lot of the neighboring countries as well. So if we really want to change the sector, we can not only declare the goal as to produce as much electrical megawatt hour as possible with renewables, we have to think in thermal terms as well. When you look at our current portfolio, we have around 300 million euros in implementation and in preparation. And in the energy sector, we try to give an impression of that holistic approach. So we will invest more than 80 million in renewable energies, hydropower, wind power, photovoltaic. We are setting up a new district heating system in Bitola, and that is exactly what we have to do. We have to offer the people an alternative in the heating mode. And not only this, we need a broader discussion on political level. Where do we want to go in the next 20 years that people can decide and have a valid basis to decide, how do I want to heat my house? Is gas the right direction? Now we come to the provocation part. Is gas the right direction for private households? Of course, where you already have a network, you have to invest some 8,000 euros as a private household into a gas boiler. And you expect to run it at least 20, 25 years. In addition, we are, as I said, energy efficiency in student dormitories. But coming back to the private sector, to the households, until distribution networks are there and until people can get connected, of course, Bitola, we will provide district heating. Some areas cannot be provided by district heating. They are perfect for connection with gas, as there's already something ongoing. But in that areas where people can get connected in 2035, and then 5, 10 years later, you have to tell the people, I'm sorry, you have to get disconnected with your 8,000 boiler and to choose another technology. That is exactly, and I will conclude now, that is exactly the challenge we are facing in Germany. The heating sector is our major challenge, beside industry. That is a completely different topic, but the heating sector. And I see the ambassador of Sweden. What was the major difference Sweden made at that time? Even in 1980, Sweden has introduced a carbon tax on all fossil fuel consumption. They were lucky. They had a good mixture of nuclear power and of renewables, so people could decide very easily higher investment in heat pumps, but very low operational costs. So the signal was clear. And I think this debate we have to continue in North Macedonia. What is the option for the privates when it comes to heating? That is a major impact of the energy crisis, to give the right direction for their decisions, that we do not face the same problems as other countries in 10, 15 years, and then really it's too late. Thank you very much.
Thank you, René. Thank you, René, especially pointing out on the need for holistically taking the picture of what's going on in the country and coordinating the different efforts that are going on and the different projects, really important. But you also mentioned energy efficiency, and that's one of the 5 dimensions of the Energy Union that are elaborated in the North Macedonia National Plan for Energy and Climate. And there are many policies included in it, which are particularly important given the projected increase in the consumption of primary and final energy by 2040 due to the continuing economic growth. Number of policies and measures, such as reducing energy consumption in buildings, something that you already mentioned, industry and the transport sector, reducing the losses in the energy transformation, transmission and distribution network, something also mentioned in your speech. It would be interesting to hear from the perspective of electro distribution company in Macedonia, which is EVN, especially on their plans as a company to speed up, to step up their engagement in these regards. Mr. Stefan, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alexandra. Thanks for the question, and especially thanks for addressing the question, especially to me. Since I work for a company, I represent a company which does sales of electricity, and sometimes, not these days, make even money out of that. But we do appreciate energy efficiency, and I think it's a very important topic. It might be more important these days than ever before, since we are facing increased prices of electricity since half a year, increasement which has never done before, 4 times more, 400%. So the equation is very easy. When you saved €1 in the past, you can save €4 right now. And this makes completely logic and sense. And as the minister said before, we are under pressure of having good prices for our customers. I always say the cheapest electricity is the one which you don't spend. This is what you can save. Now, energy efficiency is based on 3 pillars, or 2 pillars actually, investment in products, in technology, or having different behavior. The investment is the more expensive one, but as we all know, it's just money, it's easier. The change of behavior, it's more difficult. And since René asked for a little bit of provocation, I will agree on that. Actually, we are here not a good role model of changing behavior. It's a bright day out there. We could have the conference in the park, but we are sitting with curtains, artificial lights, air-conditioned. No offenses, Minister, but energy efficiency, we have to change our behaviors. And it is difficult, of course, but it is possible. It was not meant like that. I just want to dramatize how difficult changing of behavior is, although it is possible. And we have seen this thanks to the Regulatory Commission, which has abolished the low tariff during daytime. We used to have in this country a low tariff during daytime, which was contradictory to the prices at daytime, which are high, peak prices, and the prices to the customers were low. I always call it the happy hour. And with some mighty move, the Regulatory Commission abolished this on the 1st of January, and the customers changed their behavior within 2 weeks. So we could follow this with a daily load curve, where there was a peak at noon, and this peak has shifted now to the night tariff, where there's also low tariff. So a change of behavior is possible. It just requires either education or incentives, or sometimes, unfortunately, the opposite, a little bit of punishment. Talking about incentives and investment, we come to the business sector, where there is a gold rush ongoing right now by putting photovoltaics on rooftops, unused rooftops, which is an excellent idea, I have to confess. And if you make a dimension which fits to your consumption, you can save also a lot of money, and by that get more productive in terms of energy efficiency. You could also adapt your machines. Not so many companies dare to try to do this investment because it's also costly, but it pays off. Now, does this photovoltaics is the solution? No, it's not the solution. It is part of the solution, because we have this topic of balancing energy. We have this topic of the volatile energy produced by sun and unpredictable energy. Although in the night it's very predictable, it's zero. So photovoltaic solar energy produces approximately 1,000 full load hours per year. This is quite good, and in North Macedonia, with the good sunshine, it can be 1,500, something like that. Wind produces 2,000. The third renewable energy which we like is hydro, which can produce almost 4,000. But if we add them up, and let's pretend for a second they come consequently, one after the other, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, we have 7,000 full load hours, but the year has 8,760 hours. So we need third, fourth forms of energy as a transitional energy, but as a base load energy. And whether this is the CO2-free nuclear energy, whether this is the freedom gas, whether this is the green gas, whether this is the good old coal-fired power plant with, unfortunately, the lowest production costs, but there has to be a transitional energy in place to cover this baseload energy. We were talking about the energy crisis, and it was mentioned we have different names. I also would call it multi-crisis. And I would want to say that we are in the middle of, but from my perspective, we are at the beginning. And it's going to last, from my perception. This is why the old world doesn't work anymore. There was once the equation that the prices of energy follow the balance of supply and demand. This equation is not true anymore, because in 2021, neither the supply has changed nor the demand has changed, but the prices, as I mentioned, have risen by 4 times. What I see is that the new price of electricity and of energy at all is based on expectations. And expectations have very much to do with trust. And as long as there is no trust in the sector that we can achieve, these prices will remain high. And I just want to invite you for a little bit of a thought experiment. If you would say the war in Ukraine is over by tomorrow, just in our mind, it's a nice feeling. And everything will be fine, and even the countries will apologize and say it wasn't a good idea at all. Would you think that the electricity prices, especially, but energy prices, will go down back to where they were in August 2021? And I would not say so, because we have learned something. We cannot trust in this source of energy. And by that, this trust is damaged, and by that, this price niveau, which was before, is damaged as well. What we need is a transition, and this transition needs time and it needs money. Because we invested in Europe in the last 50 years, 200,000 kilometers of gas pipelines, infrastructure, which carry energy. And we want to replace this right now. And this replacement can be done, but it cannot be done in 5 months, most likely not in 5 years. But the more it is important that we start now with the investment and with a good portion of money put into this sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. The cheapest electricity is the electricity not spent. So I love it. It's a good slogan for an energy-saving campaign that could be run by the country in the future. And I'm very pleased to end up this panel with Mr. Marko Bislimovski, who has recently announced a reformed tariff model for billing electricity spending, or in other words, a fair price for all. Whoever spends more, he pays more. Could you please briefly discuss the expected key impacts of the so-called block tariffs on the spending behavior of households, and hence on the increased energy efficiency that most of us already spoken at length during the panel? Furthermore, the latest months of severe energy crisis and a sharp rise in fuel prices at global markets have prompted governments across Europe to utilize anti-crisis measures by targeting the most vulnerable groups of citizens. Do block tariffs actually belong to this category of supporting the most vulnerable categories of energy consumers? And are there any best practices in this regard? Thank you, and we have less than 7 minutes, I think about 5 minutes left, so I would appreciate if we can hold up to that. Thank you.
I will speak in Macedonian. Thank you for the invitation and the possibility to participate on this forum. The Regulatory Commission in the past period started with the analysis to see the possibility to introduce block tariffs, and one important reason why we are introducing such tariffs is that we have a real high average consumption per household, because in the country many of the households do not have another option for heating during the winter period, and they use electricity. Also, when we conducted the analysis, we observed something serious. 1% of the households use 20% of the electricity of the households. And furthermore, when we deepened the analysis, we identified that only 17 consumers declared as households use 10% of the total needs of households. It's a fact that a household that spends so much, they don't have a problem to cover the expenses for electricity. The first and the most important objective with the introduction of the block tariffs for household was to send a signal to the consumers to reduce consumption of electricity, and those households that realistically don't have a financial problem to pay their bills, electricity bills, and I believe this will happen. First of all, they will invest in a more energy efficient way of heating with electricity, and in that way we will remove the burden ESM to provide more and more energy for households. That is the first objective, to reduce consumption of electricity with the households. The second objective is, as much as possible, for these mechanisms to be just, to be, and it's a fact that more poor households spend less energy. The concept actually is to help vulnerable categories of consumers as much as possible, although I think that for these categories of consumers, we need to change the concept of support and to increase the support that they receive, and also to increase the categories of vulnerable groups that receive help from the state in order to facilitate the changes of the electricity prices, because it's a fact that there are households that do not have a problem with paying their electricity bills. As a country, we need to forget the golden period of energy sectors. We have real problems with domestic production, and these problems are due to lack of investments in the field. The third block in Bitola was built at the end of the 80s. And the experts then, all experts in the energy sectors talk that the reserves of coal will end, the quality will be low. But unfortunately, we believe that, yes, it would happen, but somewhere further in the future. So during these years of crisis, we are facing this problem. The best solution is investing in the sector, but these investments must be paid. Non-investing, we are now paying it, and we are just extinguishing the fire. If we invested, we wouldn't have the expenses we have now to procure electricity on a national level, because realistically we need to see also the Macedonian companies that face seriously increased expenses for electricity. But what is especially important for me is that many of the Macedonian companies in the past several months invested in building photovoltaics to reduce their expenses. I expect that until the end of the year to have new 80 megawatt hour voltaics. As comparison, the last biggest hydro plant in Macedonia has that strength, and I hope that this signal finally will be accepted by the municipal institutions, and not to use manipulation and to go back to the regulatory electricity market. Thank you.
Господин Beslimovsky, investments is agreed to end up a very interesting, very resourceful panel. I've enjoyed it greatly. Hope that you as panelists, distinguished guests today, have enjoyed it too, as also our audience. So I'll look forward to see you on a different occasion, continuing these discussions on the green and energy transition, especially from the financing point of view. All the best. Have a good day. Thank you.